criticizing other people in an unfair way, in an unfair manner. And furthermore, it's also illegal, basically. Hate speech is illegal, it's a fact.
Okay,
Thank you.
so I actually agree with the statement because from my point of view, a lot of people can't take criticism. They get really, they feel bad about criticism and about being criticized, but I view criticism as a thing that it comes with life. You have to deal with it, and it actually helps you get better. So what do you think about that?
Well, I also mostly agree, since I also see like what your point is. I too believe that a lot of people perceive criticism to be meant as something bad and that people want to attack the person themselves, when actually they are just criticizing the way they behave, their actions.
Yes.
And as long as it's constructive criticism, and as long as people actually have a reason to criticize you and don't just do it to attack you, which, as you already said, would be considered hate speech or could be considered hate speech, then I feel like it should always be accepted, because criticism is not meant to hurt you. Criticism is meant to improve you, and criticism is meant to give you a foreign perspective on what you did. And so I believe that people should stop being a little too sensitive from time to time and should rather start to see that a lot of times people don't want. Okay, well, my name is Leah. I'm from Germany. I am 17 years old and I am currently doing my finals.
Yeah. So, what is the definition of hate speech to you?
For me, hate speech is a form of speech where you try to bring a point across, but you're not really considering how you do it, and therefore you might say mean stuff, and also you might harass people.
It's a statement that I can't fully agree to. There are some things that the moral actually won't allow you to say, and there are these unwritten rules in society that every person should follow. However, the fact that just expressing yourself and saying what actually is on your mind is also really important. But most of the time, I think that people should be able to say whatever it's on their minds, as long as it's just don't crosses the line of the values, because we have to value other people's religions. We have to like always remember that everyone is equal, that people can't be judged or just harassed because of their skin color or their orientation, etc., etc.
Yeah. Well, I would say that you are generally allowed to say what you think. However, there is one exception, which is hate speech. Regarding hate speech, there are two basic human rights involved, as I believe. First of all, the right of the freedom of speech, but also the freedom of self-expression. And, well, concerning the freedom of speech, it's basically just you are allowed to say whatever you say, right? And concerning the freedom of expression, it states that you are allowed to express yourself however you want. But if you talk about hate speech, then you are criticizing other people in an unfair way, in an unfair manner. And furthermore, it's also illegal, basically. Hate speech is illegal, it's a fact. Concerning the freedom of expression, when you practice hate speech, then you are restricting other people's freedom of expression because you oppress them, because you harass them, and because you criticize them for unfair reasons that they might not even be able to influence. And so I would say that hate speech is unnecessary because not being able to perform hate speech does not restrict your freedom of speech, but it restricts other people's freedom of expression.
But what if hate speech actually resembles the truth? What you do in that way, and it's just the manner of expressing your opinion. It's just maybe because at the moment maybe you can be really emotional about some other stuff, and you just it came out that way. For example, as hate speech, you can like label it as hate speech, but the true reason is about the person is telling you the truth, but he or she just got too emotional about some other stuff, about, like, for example, his life or her life problems, and it just goes to you, their negativity and aggressiveness. I'm not saying that it's all right, but it happens, and we can't resist that it does not happen, because it does.
I totally agree with you, actually, but this is basically the definition of hate speech. Hate speech is trying to bring a point across, but being really unfriendly about it, if you put it like in some like nicer words, because hate speech, it hurts other people, and even though you might not intend to hurt other people, you actually do with hate speech. And I strongly believe that hate speech is a different thing than constructive criticism, because what you were just talking about in the beginning, I would consider constructive criticism. Like, if you say something to someone and it's actually true, but they're just too sensitive about it, then that may be considered constructive criticism. But if you actually become unfriendly and start to harass people in a mean manner, then it becomes hate speech, even if you don't want to.
I would grade hate speech to the softest one, to the harshest one, because people are. What I'm trying to say that I might be that much sensitive about things they tell me. So hello, I'm Nino. I'm from Georgia. I'm 19, and currently I'm a student in my home country in Tbilisi, the capital, and I'm learning economics and accounting.
Okay, so what is the definition of hate speech to you?
Definition of hate speech is pretty much subjective for me, and I think it's subjective for every person. Oh wow. Of course, it would be perfect if we lived peacefully with each other. However, I mean, the act of violence can lead to some real huge physical issues, and sometimes, especially from the country I come from, it's pretty common that the act of violence ends up brutally in some cases. And of course, it's better to express your opinion like verbally than sacrifice someone's life. So I pretty much agree with the statement, but to sum it up, of course, I'm not in favor of violence generally.
Yes. I think it depends on the person you're confronting with either violence or basically harassment, because harassment leaves psychological damage, and obviously violence leaves like visible damage, like on your body. But different people might cope with these issues in different ways?
I really like your point. I didn't think about it like the first time, but I still have to say that if violence leads to fatal outcome, it's always better to harass someone verbally. So to sum the last point is, of course, that violence is not getting us anywhere. It just brings us a lot of different problems and stuff to deal with, and no one has to actually bear with this, because we have our own human rights. We are all free, we're all equal, and we have the right to live in the world with no violence and no harassment, and of course no hate speech.